Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 10th episode of TCN Presents The Cultured Pull List. In this episode, we're actually going to be tackling two full graphic novels. We each chose one, and they're some of our favorites. So we got The Death of Superman and Titan's Hunt. So stay tuned. We're going to be jumping into those. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, this is our 10th episode. It's going to be somewhat special, I guess. We introduced ourselves a while ago, second episode.
Yeah.
But we never really talked about our tastes or what are some of our favorite stories. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, at least for me, it's hard to pin it down to just one, but we couldn't do, 80 different issues, and
Right.
stuff. So we each picked one. I picked Death of Superman, and Luke, you picked Titan's Hunt.
Yeah.
Which isn't super surprising. I figured it'd be something Titans, but
Yeah.
So Death of Superman. So this one, for me, it's probably 60 to 70%. The reason I like this is, because it's a really cool story
Mm-hmm.
and just really pretty badass, just art and everything in it. But also the other 30 to 40% is probably just nostalgia, to be honest, because this was the first comic book I ever actually read.
Okay.
Actual comic book. I've been familiar, I'd watch cartoons and stuff as a kid, but my dad had the graphic novel, which actually I still have the one he had.
Oh, nice.
It's the original printing in 93.
Mm.
I think it's the only graphic novel he really owned, but I ended up reading it at some point. I think I wasn't really supposed to because I was 6 or 7, but I ended up finding it in my dad's, he had some stash somewhere of stuff, and I found it and read part of it. I mostly skimmed through it,
Mm-hmm.
but when I was a couple years older, my dad actually let me read it. So it was the first comic I really ever read.
Nice.
All time, yeah. So it's kind of got a special place in my heart, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it just so happened to be a super iconic one too.
Yeah.
So,
Titans Hunt kind of a similar thing to me. I started reading comics in 2012 with Thor, but this was right when I was starting to get into the monthly issues was when this was happening.
Okay, yeah.
And part of the reason why I love it so much, and I'll get into this in a little bit, is because it is. So basically, there are three generations of Titans, more or less. You have the original, then you have the one most popular one is the second generation with Cyborg, Starfire, Beast Boy, and all that.
Yeah.
And then the third generation is Tim Drake, Connor Kent, Cassandra Sandsmark, and more kind of Young Justice almost. And in the New 52, basically when that happened, it wiped the first two out of continuity. So the only Teen Titans were the third generation with Tim Drake and Connor Kent and all that.
Right.
And so this story basically is retconning it so that the first generation actually did happen, but nobody remembers it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so I've always been partial to those characters. I think obviously the best written story, the best stories come from the second with Marv Wolfman, but the characters themselves are probably the first generation with Dick Grayson, Donna Troy, Roy Harper. Those are probably my favorite Titans characters.
That was when they were still kids, right? And Dick was still Robin and everything. Yeah.
Right. And so taking those characters and putting it into the modern continuity was just really cool.
Yeah.
And so that's why I really like this story.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I look forward to getting into it. But yeah, let's do Death of Superman first. So so many people worked on this. It was really hard cramming everybody's name in here. But for writers, we have Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Louis Simonson, Roger Stern. And then for artists, Dennis Janke, Bob McLeod, Doug Hazelwood, John Bogdanov, Tom Grummett, and that's all the artists. And then the inkers were Brett Breeding, Rick Burchett, Doug Hazelwood, Dennis Janke, and then colorists were Dennis Rodier, Gene D'Angelo, Glenn. The letterers were Dean G. Angelo, and then Glenn Whitmore. They were two of the colorists. Kind of Yeah, see, I was kind of cramming them together towards
Yeah,
the end. So
yeah.
then the letterers were John Costanza, Albert de Guzman, Bill Oakley, and Willie Schubert. And these issues that are in this graphic novel were released between December 92 and January 93, but I think the actual book came out in 93 that same year. So later in 93 is when it came out. So, yeah. All right. So this book opens with this kind of iconic, really cool shot of Doomsday breaking out of his prison, basically, which I guess quick history lesson on Doomsday. Not going to get super into it, but for those of you who aren't uh, super up to date on his history and everything, he basically was created on like prehistoric Krypton. This weird mad scientist guy basically was trying to make the ultimate survival killing machine. So he basically he kept throwing his cloned, like he made some sort of, creature in a test tube. He basically made a test tube baby and then like threw it out into prehistoric Krypton and watched to see if it could survive. And every time it died, either by the elements or from creatures killing it, he would just use its remains to clone another one. And over time, the clones started developing more and more attributes that let it survive up until the point that it became Doomsday. But it kind of kept some of its memory of its pain from its previous deaths. So it ended up just becoming a creature like filled with like pure rage and disdain for all life. And it eventually killed its creator and just kind of went on this rampage across like the galaxy. And eventually it like destroyed this planet, this like wreaked havoc on this planet for like 3 years. And they eventually were able to stop him and put him in this contain. Well, they actually thought they killed him, which they kind of did. That's the thing too. Every time Doomsday dies, he comes back and evolves to not be killed the same way.
Right.
So they did end up killing Doomsday, and they put him in this like traditional ceremonial suit that they put their dead in, and then put him in like this ship and launched him out into space because he didn't deserve, a proper burial.
Right.
That was the idea. So he ended up landing on Earth and remained dormant for like a long, long time, and eventually managed to wiggle or get his one arm free. I'm not sure if they ever explained how that happened, but he was able to get his arm free and then broke out of his broke out of the ship that and was like deep underground. And so that's what we see here, and we see him breaking out and kind of breaking out from underneath the ground that he was hanging out in. So then we cut to Metropolis. There's this kid named Keith, this orphan kid. He lives in the orphanage. His like, I kind of think this kind of feels like this picks up kind of in the middle of some other stories that were happening at the time in the Superman comics, because we have these people creature things called the Underworlders, who are failed Cadmus experiments, and a few like homeless people that other outcasts that join their ranks, but they're trying to make war on the surface basically. And this one kid, they told this one orphan kid Keith, I guess, that they have his long lost mom and we're gonna kill her unless like he helped them. But he ends up going down there to see if they actually have his mom. And Lois Lane had received a note, like a tip to go down into the sewers. So she goes, but she ends up getting captured by the Underworlders. And Keith sees her get captured and realizes that they don't have his mom. So then he goes and calls for Superman. He uses spray paint to make a Superman symbol, and Superman sees it, which he already knew. Superman saved him a couple of times. So they're kind of friends, but he ends up calling Superman, telling Superman what's going on. And Superman goes down into the sewers and beats the crap out of the Underworlders, basically, and saves Lois. And all of this is intercut with Doomsday just kind of wreaking havoc everywhere he goes. He just kind of leaving a trail of death and destruction. You can see him just like crushing a bird for no reason and breaking it an overpass, and they show him like laughing most of the time he's doing this. Assuming it's maniacal laughter. So then we cut to Superman. He is having an interview with Cat Grant on live television. And while this is going on, the Justice League of America, which at this point is made up of mostly like B and C listers. I'm not really sure why, but I think it's just like some of the changes that were made after like post-crisis and everything. So this Justice League team consists of Blue Beetle, the Ted Cord Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, Guy Gardner, who isn't a Green Lantern anymore. He was kicked out of the Corps, but he still has a ring, but it makes yellow constructs, but I don't think he's part of the Sinestro Corps. And then we have Bloodwind, who is kind of an obscure character, and Maxima, who is, again, a pretty obscure character, and there's also Fire and Ice. So they're flying around in Blue Beetle's Beetle plane or whatever the heck it is. I think they just call it the Bug or something, but they're flying around. They heard word that there's this trail of destruction being left in like the Midwest, so they go to investigate it. They see a bunch of trees that were just knocked over, and they follow the trail, and they end up finding Doomsday, who, by the way, up to this point, Doomsday in the comics was called, well, when they go back and tell his origin, he's called the Ultimate, but he's given the name Doomsday by something Booster Gold says, actually, but we'll get to that later. So they find Doomsday. He sees them flying above him, and he just chucks one of the trees right through the Beetle or the Bug or whatever it is, and send all the Justice Leaguers flying. But, the ones that can fly save the rest of them.
Right.
And they engage in battle with Doomsday, but he just starts picking them off, beating the crap out of them. They're like surprised at how strong he is and how fast he is. And even Bloodwind, who is incredible, apparently a really strong character, he punches him with all his strength, and it does absolutely nothing. So Doomsday proceeds to just beat the ever-loving crap out of Guy and Blue Beetle, which is kind of a side thing. I kind of had to look this up. But Bloodwind isn't actually Bloodwind right now. He's actually like Martian Manhunter being mind controlled and pretending to be Bloodwind. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but Blue Beetle has been suspicious of him this whole time, and there is a fire that breaks out during their battle, and Blue Beetle sees him in his Martian form, but before he can tell anybody, Doomsday like puts him in a coma, which is honestly surprising. He freaking survives this, being just a normal dude, and given how strong Doomsday is, it's kind of surprising he doesn't just squash his head, I feel like it's more they just wanted to keep him for future stories. But at the same time, like Ted Cord, like he really like gets a raw deal most of the time. Like Doomsday beats the crap out of him, puts him in a coma. Then later on, Maxwell Lord ends up beating him and shooting him in the head. It's just he's just not a he definitely gets the wrong end of the stick most of the time. But Superman hears what's happening, and he leaves his interview because it's just a stupid interview, and the Justice League needs him. But while he's making his way over there, Booster Gold's kind of the last man standing for the moment, and he's not really putting a dent in Doomsday, and Doomsday punches him like right after he puts up his force field, so he just barely has enough time, but it still sends him like flying like into the atmosphere. But Superman catches him, and Doomsday, once he kind of lays everybody out, he just kind of continues his journey of destruction. And Ice convinces Maxima to take Ted Cord to the hospital, take Blue Beetle to the hospital, which she doesn't want to do, but she does. So at that point, only Ice is left to deal with Doomsday. So then we cut to this kid named Mitch. it's not really that important, but he and his mom aren't like on the best of terms because he blames his mom for his dad leaving. Um, so there's that. But while they're in the middle of a fight, ice gets thrown through their window and lands on their counter. And Doomsday is like right outside of their house. But a couple minutes later, Doomsday, or not Doomsday, Superman and Booster Gold show up and start fighting Doomsday in the middle of that housing development right outside Mitch's house. I think his name is Mitch Anderson, so the Anderson's house. And there's this really cool shot image where Doomsday punches Superman in the stomach and like he just stands there and takes it. It's pretty cool, but then it's kind of short-lived because then Doomsday winds up and kicks Superman and he ends up flying through the Anderson house.
Right.
But after he recovers at that point, Bloodwind, Fire, and Guy Gardner show up. They'd recovered as well, and all of them everyone who's left ends up just firing everything they have at Doomsday. And they think it's going to take him down, but it doesn't. All it does is remove more of his costume, more of his clothes, whatever you want to call it, suit, and he ends up just attacking them and bowling them all over. And he ends up grabbing Guy Gardner, whose ring was out of power. So he's pretty much defenseless, and he just kind of has his way with him, which isn't a pretty sight. He even freaking slams his head in the door, which is kind of interesting how he just kind of like use his environment. Like he doesn't just beat on him. He's like, hey, I'm going to smash him into a tree and slam his head in the door. Like, damn. Which again, it's kind of a miracle that he survives. So he kind of makes quick work of everybody else. Doomsday does. And the only one left to stop him is Superman. But during the fight, there was an explosion. Bloodwind's like heat vision and ended up hitting the Anderson house. So the house ends up getting blown up, and Mitch's mom is trapped inside, and he's calling for help. But Superman is flying after Doomsday, who just keeps jumping. He's basically like the Hulk in that he can just jump for miles, but he can't fly.
Yeah.
So Superman is chasing after him, and he hears Mitch's cries for help and wants to help him, but he needs to stop Doomsday first from hurting more people. So he ends up grabbing him and bringing him into the bottom of the ocean and throwing him, like burying him on the ocean floor. And then he goes back and he and Bloodwind help Mitch and his mom. Then Doomsday, it really doesn't take him that long to get out of the bottom of the ocean where Superman buried him, and pretty soon he's back destroying stuff. Like he destroys a military helicopter, and Superman saves the pilots, but Doomsday ends up landing in this smaller town, and he and Superman start going at it. But then Maxima, who apparently recovered, shows up, and she and Superman kind of double team Doomsday, but she accidentally causes an explosion when there's a gasoline leak from them smashing into a gas station, and she rips up a light pole to like smack Doomsday with it, but it causes sparks and that sets the gasoline on fire. So that explosion ends up knocking out Maxima and Superman, but Doomsday doesn't really seem that fazed by it, and he just kind of continues his path of destruction and gets away from them. Then we cut to Lois, and she's going to collect Jimmy Olsen from this show he's filming called Turtle Boy. It seems like he's doing it like as a side gig because she makes a comment about taking a 3-hour lunch break. But she grabs Jimmy, and they both fly off in the Daily Planet helicopter to follow Superman and Doomsday and, just get pictures and write on it, I guess, is kind of the idea. But it's also because, Lois is worried about Superman. Which they are. I think they might be engaged at this point, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure she knows about that. He's Superman. I'm not 100% sure. The story doesn't really tell. It just kind of picks up in the middle of it and kind of, expects you to have read what's been going on with, like most comics do.
Yeah.
But then we also see Lex Luthor and Supergirl watching the news, and Supergirl wants to go help Superman, but Lex doesn't want her to.
Yeah,
And
because
she
at
ends
this
up,
point, for people who don't know, this is actually Lex Luthor Jr., I think.
kind of,
And yeah, so he and Supergirl, he's a good guy, and he and Supergirl are dating. So if you didn't know that.
Yeah, he's kind of, so here's I looked into it. It's like some weird post-crisis, reboot thing where, he's Lex Luthor's illegitimate son from Australia, apparently.
Yeah.
And he kind of puts on a facade of a good guy, but eventually he's revealed to be a bad guy, like his dad. But yeah, he and Supergirl are an item. They're together, and she doesn't know that he's a bad guy. But she isn't really Superman's cousin in this continuity. They changed that after Crisis.
Matrix Supergirl or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Where she's like a being made of some, like, I don't know, sludge thing, but can shape shift into Supergirl, which is weird.
Yeah,
comics are weird. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, Supergirl listens to Lex and decides not to help Superman yet. I think his excuse is like he wants her to stay there because without Superman, there's nobody to defend Metropolis.
Right.
But while Superman and Maxima are still out cold in that town, the Guardian shows up, and just kind of lends them a hand and ends up taking Maxima to the hospital because she's still down for the count. But Superman gets up and flies after Doomsday, who's still just having a ball, destroying everything and killing people.
Yeah.
And Superman ends up saving this guy in a car that Doomsday had just chucked the car like several hundred feet in the air. But he ends up tracking Doomsday down to this Lex, like it was like Lexmart or something like that. It's Lexmart, Lex Luthor, one of like a convenience store, or a grocery. Well, it's not really. It's more than a grocery store. It's kind of like a Walmart, it seems like. So, but while Doomsday is there at the store, he sees this commercial on the TV advertising this wrestling event in Metropolis, and he seems to have some sort of sentience to him because he does say Metropolis, though it's like Metropolis or something, But it seems like he wants to go there, and just have a fun time there, I guess. Sure, he has no evil intentions. So he Superman tracks him there. They fight briefly there, but he's able to just shrug Superman off and keep going. And Superman does see a sign from Metropolis, and it's only 60 miles away. And he hears Doomsday say, Metropolis, and he realizes, he saw the commercial and wants to, like, he knows the name and is headed to Metropolis. So Superman ends up picking up Doomsday and chucking him into a mountain, hoping to stop him. And it turns out that the mountain is actually a Cadmus base. And so he ends up like they end up fighting in this tree town, I guess. That was made by some of the Cadmus experiments, and Superman ends up getting buried underneath all the trees. But Doomsday manages to escape, and we see him making his way even closer to Metropolis. Now he's only 50 miles away. And I had to cut this into two separate PowerPoints. So let me skip over there. Second one. Okay, let me present. No, that's not it. All right, there we go. So then we see Doomsday in Metropolis, tearing apart a construction site, killing construction workers. But finally, Superman gets there and tries to stop him, tries to fly out into space with him, which this is directly adapted that specific scene in Batman v Superman. Superman ends up flying, like that same exact way, flying behind Doomsday. But in that movie, he actually gets to space with Doomsday, whereas here Doomsday manages to maneuver away from Superman and back to Metropolis. And all this time, Lois and Jimmy are following them in the Daily Planet helicopter, and Lois is recording everything that she's dictating to, I think, somebody back at the Daily Planet headquarters, while Jimmy's taking pictures. So during this fight, Superman ends up getting thrown into a building, and when he pulls himself out from under the rubble, we do see that this fight's really taking a toll on him because he's actually bleeding.
Yeah.
And he has made several comments about, like, he's not sure how much longer he can go on, and like this guy, this thing doesn't seem to be tiring. And I didn't mention this earlier, but during that part where Superman catches Booster Gold in the air, Booster Gold says something about like it's like the coming of Doomsday, and they end up calling him Doomsday after that. So that's kind of where how the name came about.
Gotcha.
So the fight continues, and Doomsday ends up falling, from where Superman had flown him up into the air. He falls down and lands underneath the city where the Underworlders are, and ends up killing a few of them. The ones that were trying to attack, because it was split into two factions, like the ones that were trying to attack the surface world and the ones that didn't want to. So he ends up killing a couple that were imprisoned, and then Superman shows up and again tries to fly him out of there. But this time he puts him in a full Nelson. But a gas main was broken when the Doomsday fell through, and his foot catches on like a wire or something and ends up causing a spark, which causes like this huge explosion.
Right.
Which ends up knocking Superman away. But explosions seem to have no effect on Doomsday because he's still going. But then Supergirl finally convinces Lex that she needs to go help. So she flies over to Doomsday, and like in just one punch gets taken out. Which this really confused me when I was younger, because we see that, and then we see Matrix falling down, but I'm like, why did Supergirl turn into a weird alien thing?
Exactly.
But it's definitely a little confusing. It's still confusing even when but So, and then we also see Emil Hamilton, Dr. Hamilton, and Bibbo firing this giant laser at Doomsday, and it does seem to hurt him, but he ends up falling onto the roof that they were hanging out on, so they jump away to safety with these like force field belts that Dr. Hamilton made. And while all this is going on, Superman helps some people that were caught in that explosion. Namely, some people, I think it blew up an orphanage. So he says like his legs feel like jelly, but he still makes a good shield. So he stands in front of them and takes the brunt of whatever blast, like residual explosions happen. Then we see the Metropolis Police Department try and take out Doomsday, and they have like no effect whatsoever. And he starts taking him out, but Superman shows up and starts fighting him again before he can do too much damage. And we see Cadmus and some of their special like troopers come, and they start helping Superman fight Doomsday. But at this point, it's become just like kind of like a total throwdown fight to the death. And Superman's bleeding. He's breaking some of the bony protrusions off of Doomsday. It's getting pretty bloody.
Yeah.
I see another shot there, and his bones are digging into Superman's arm. But Doomsday eventually kind of gets the upper hand and throws Superman at the helicopter that Lois and Jimmy were in. But Superman manages to recover and save them, and he kind of gives Lois like a kiss goodbye before he jumps back into the fray, and he's extremely determined to stop Doomsday, even if it kills him. And Jimmy even remarks that he's never seen the big guy so fired up.
Yeah.
So they fight some more, and Doomsday again kind of lays Superman out, and he ends up getting buried in rubble. But Lois runs over to try and help him, which I don't know what she's gonna do, but she runs over to help him, but that catches the attention of Doomsday, and he starts coming after her. But Superman breaks out from the rubble and seems to have a renewed vigor to him, and kind of starts to slap Doomsday around a little bit, and he ends up breaking one of the bony protrusions on his knee. And he says, like, yes, I finally managed to hurt him, because up to this point, even though he's been like fighting with all his might, and he seems to be able to like stun Doomsday, he hasn't really been able to like put like there's no marks on Doomsday, whereas Superman's like super bloody and got bruises and his costume's all torn. And earlier he even says that like it hurt just to hit Doomsday. He's like so durable. So they keep fighting. The Superman keeps bleeding, but at this point it's pretty much a final showdown, do or die. One of them is going down, one or both of them, and they start hitting each other with such force that the surrounding building windows start shattering, and it's basically causing mini earthquakes felt in like other states, which is kind of crazy. But then there's a final blow where you see here where Superman does the like, it's called like an axe chop or whatever onto Doomsday, and Doomsday punches Superman, and they both go down. Bloodwind and Ice show up, but they're too late to help. And Superman's like exhausted, he's done, he's spent, he's really injured, and like with his last breaths he asks if Doomsday is down, which he is, and then he pretty much, well, he dies, and we get this like iconic shot of him lying there in the rubble, and that is how the book ends, which you know, fitting name, Death of Superman. But not going to get too much into it, but as most of you probably know or assumed, he doesn't stay dead. There's like another storyline, Reign of the Superman and Return of Superman. And then there's even another book, Superman Doomsday, where they have a rematch, and he ends up like using a mother box to transport him to like, I think, the future where there isn't any, like, he basically transports him to the end of time, and that's how he defeats him. But that still isn't the end of Doomsday. But yeah, and then like when Superman comes back, he's got that long hair and the black suit, which the long hair stuck around for a while in the 90s. I think he had it until probably like early 2000s. Maybe late 90s. But yeah, kind of wanted to talk just real briefly about like the versions, the adaptations that have come from this, which there still hasn't been like a perfect like a really like amazing adaptation of this. I think the closest one was probably the Death of Superman animated movie they made as part of the DC animated universe. They still changed a lot, but it was probably the closest. There was also an animated movie a while ago, Superman Doomsday, which was really nothing like the comic at all besides Superman and Doomsday fight, but it ends within the first like 20 minutes, and the rest of the movie is Superman coming back. But then there's also this clone that Lex Luthor makes that tries to become Superman, and the end fight is between a weakened resurrected Superman and this clone. And it's like it's an all right movie, but it's nothing really like the
That
comics.
sounds kind of like a culmination of all of the stories. Like it's a little bit of Death of Superman, a little bit of the reign of Superman, a little bit of Return. It kind of takes elements from all three of them.
A little bit, but it kind of doesn't fully do like anything great with any of them.
Right.
Like it's okay, but it definitely isn't, you know, a very good adaptation of the story. Yeah. What I liked about this animated one is that they had one for the Death of Superman, and then they did a second movie, Reign of the Superman, and that adapted, you know, Superman coming back, and that was pretty good too. But I don't think there's been like a perfect version of Doomsday.
Okay.
So far in live action, like, you know, we have the Smallville one, which is just like a dude in gray paint, and he's not even like, they totally changed his origin, and there's like this character, like a human character, somehow he's Doomsday, and he like transforms into Doomsday, kind of like the Hulk. And it's like, it's really freaking weird. I don't know, like I haven't really watched Smallville, but I know, you know, stuff from it, and that's Doomsday. Obviously there's the Batman v Superman one, which, I mean, I don't really have as much of a problem with it as some people do. You know, the spikes, there could be more spikes, but it's also not supposed to be like Doomsday. It's supposed to be like a kind of a second version of Doomsday, who's still is kind of an infant. Right. And he does grow more as like bone protrusions as the fight goes on. So it stands to reason eventually he'd look more like classic Doomsday. Yeah. And I think like that whole death, like that, they like very loosely adapted Death of Superman at the end. Like I feel like it fit the story fine, but it wasn't, you know, obviously a straight up adaptation of Death of Superman. But like I really do like the face though. I think they got the face really good. If he just had like hair and more spikes, he would look like perfect, I think.
Yeah.
But then there's also the Krypton version, which I really don't know what they do with him. Like he looks all right. Like he looks pretty cool. He reminds me almost of an Ent from Lord of the Rings. Like he looks almost like he's made out of bark. Yeah, which is interesting, but like looks pretty good. But there hasn't been like a perfect version, I don't think. And like I really hope at some point in the new DCU they do like an actual like Death of Superman adaptation, but like devote like a whole movie or a series to it or something, and then make it have some impact. Like don't have Superman show up in the movies and stuff for like a couple years. Yeah. And maybe introduce like Steel and Superboy during that time, and they're kind of taking his place, and then have him come back. But you know, it would be very cool to see like an actual adaptation of this story and really show Doomsday as like this relentless killing machine, you know. But yeah, that's Death of Superman. Cool. Go over to your comic.
Yeah. So I'm picking Titan's Hunt, which was written by Dan Abnett, and it had art by Paulo Siqueira, Paul Peltier, Brett Booth, Geraldo Borges, Steven Segorva, Jackson Herbert, Art Thurbert, Ray McCarthy, Wayne Foucher, Sandra Hope, Norm Rapemud, and then the colorist was Hi-Fi, Andrew Dahlhaus, Andrario Lucas, and the letterer was Carlos M. Mongolia, and I apologize for those names, but yeah. And I think that the date was actually September 2015. So there's a typo there, but that's fine.
I think the date that the...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, the issue started in late 2015.
Yeah, I think the graphic novel came out in 2016.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so basically Roy Harper struggles a lot with substance abuse, and it kind of goes in, the narration here kind of goes into explaining that a little bit more. About the narration, I'm not really sure what it is, because there is later on in the story we do have like inner monologues of different characters, But this is just kind of like a generic third person kind of
Right,
narration. I don't really know what's happening. But anyway, basically explains that some people they drink to forget things that happened to them, to kind of run from their demons. But Roy Harper, he drinks because he has no demons and he's trying to remember whatever he's forgotten. And at the moment, he's looking up at this water tower, and it's kind of freaking him out because it almost vaguely reminds him of something, although he doesn't remember what it is. And then there's a tornado siren that goes off, and he's like, well, I got to go stock up on my booze real quick before the tornado comes. And so he goes into this store, and the guy's like, we're going to close. And he's like, yeah, I just need to pick it up, my beer real quick. And the cash register right at the end drops the liquor, but then he picks it up and he's like, oh, you're Speedy. And he's like, wait, what? And then
I get it. It's like
he's
just saying he's speedy as in fast, but his name was Speedy when he was first. Sidekick. That's fun.
Yes, it is. And then we cut to Dick Grayson, which at this time he was not a superhero. He was just kind of like a spy.
Wasn't he an agent of like what is it, like
the Spiral? Yeah,
Spiral. There we go. Yeah.
And that happened in the event Forever Evil. His identity was exposed, and so he kind of went undercover as a super spy.
Right, that's right.
And so at this point, it had been a couple of years since he'd actually been like a proper like superhero with a secret identity and all that.
Okay.
So anyway, he's on a mission. He's trying to track down these organ not organ donors. Those are good people. Organ like sellers, bad people. Yeah. So they're selling organs, but like they're selling like Atlantean organs. So I guess they're worse than regular people. But anyway, so he beats him up. But then this Atlantean guy shows up, and he's like Dick like vaguely remembers him, but he can't really place where he remembers him from. And then as he leaves, he jumps it back into the water, and there's this weird like a spiral thing, and he's like, that kind of freaks him out because it reminds him of something just like the water tower, but he can't place where it is.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then we cut to this small town, a small coastal town, and there's these dudes, and they're like freaking out because there's this woman in a hood, and they don't know what she is. We'll come back to this is kind of like with the Batman story we did a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of weird details, but they kind of all fit together in the end. So right now it just kind of seems random, but it'll all come together.
Gotcha.
And then we go to this like Oscars type award show, and Malcolm Duncan has won the award for best score. And as he goes up to his accept his award, he notices the flash from all the bulbs, which isn't necessarily important for this story, but like I mentioned, this story leads into the Titans ongoing series, and then like the whole thing with the Flash kind of ties into that.
Right.
So this is kind of mentioning like the Flash kind of leads into that whole thing, because at this point, well, I'll explain this I guess right now. The original, there were 14 in the 60s. The 60s original Teen Titans, there were 14 of them.
Okay.
And by the time the new 52 came around and retconned it, like I mentioned, a lot of those characters just hadn't even been introduced. So there was like Dick Grayson was there. I think maybe Roy Harper was in the new 52. But a lot of them weren't. And so by the time that this story came around, they kind of had to reimagine them in the context of the new 52. And so you have these characters that are sort of different than what they were originally, but they had to kind of fit. We'll see that with Donna Troy later on. But
okay.
Yeah, and so most of those characters are carried over. There's some like the Joker's daughter who like in the 60s was kind of like a proto Harley Quinn. But by the time the new 52 came around, she was like a weird serial killer and doesn't really fit in with the Teen Titans anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, so it's basically imagining all of those characters as adults in the new 52. And right. So the Flash, in the new 52, there was a Wally West Kid Flash, but it was a different Wally West Kid Flash than was before. So that Wally West,
that was the Black Wally West, right?
Yeah. And so there's actually a different character than the one. It's not just a race swap like we all assumed for a while, but right around 2016, they were like, no, actually, there's two Wally West Flashes. Right. And the other one with the red hair was kind of lost in the multiverse for a long time. And so that's what this is about. Like they all kind of vaguely have some kind of like something's missing, but they can't place it. That's part of what's happening, but there's a lot of other things happening as well. So basically, yeah, as he goes to go up the stairs. He sees a bunch of stairs that kind of freaks him out. He sort of has a hallucination there. And then we cut back to Dick, who's basically talking to Huntress, who is his boss at the spy agency.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, yeah, the organ trader got away, but I was attacked by this Atlantean dude, and that's really weird. Then he hangs up the phone, and he gets called again by someone he doesn't know. But then it turns out that she's actually projecting herself into the room with him, and she's like, we have to bring them all together. I can't tell you what's happening because I don't want to alert anyone else, but you need to bring them all together. And Dick's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And all this is happening. He's watching one of the movies with Mel's score because something about the music is like nostalgic to him, although he can't place it. Yeah, and so he realizes that the woman was not on the phone, but it was actually like a mental projection, and so he's freaking out. And once again, that spiral thing shows up on the TV.
Right.
Yeah, and so we cut back to Roy. He's like, I've been drinking again, and so he's really upset. And so he calls his counselor, and it turns out that it was the same woman from earlier who was showing up with Dick. And at the end of the issue, he finds out that she has files on all of the Teen Titans, and so we will find out the significance of that a little bit later. But as at the beginning of the next issue, we see Roy is driving. He's trying to get to his counselor, but then he sees this weird figure on his dashboard, and it causes him to swerve out. And so the cops show up because they think he's like drunk, although he kind of is, but
right.
He's also like freaking out because he just saw like a weird ghost thing. And so they arrest him, and we go back to the convenience store with this guy. His name is Narc, and he's like drawing like cave paintings and stuff, and he's like talking about bringing them together and talking about going on a hunt. And so then he basically leaves, and his manager's not super happy about that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and then we cut to Dick at the Batcave, and this is actually a really cool exchange with Alfred. He's at the Batcave talking about the Atlantean and the organs and all that. And then so Alfred just kind of starts talking about this metaphor about like hunters and prey. And Dick's like, so you want me to lure the Atlantean out? And Alfred's like, no, I was just filling the dead air. I was just kind of talking. Totally irrelevant. It was really funny. So then we cut back to Roy, who got into a fight with the cops, and then he gets arrested for attacking a cop and also like threatening. He stole a firearm from a cop, and that's not good.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and he's just wheeling the gun around because they think he's drunk, but he's actually hearing voices from the ghost that he saw. And then so we cut back to Mel and his pregnant wife Karen, and they're like, she's like, well, it's going over the photos from the award night, and there's this weird thing in the background. What's happening? And he's like, oh, it's probably just nothing. Yeah,
it's obviously something.
Yes, it's definitely something. And then so Dick takes Alfred's not advice, so he lures the Atlantean out because it is mentioned earlier that the Atlantean can smell other Atlantean blood. That's how he was able to find the organ.
Oh. And
so he's like, I'll just throw a little bit in the water, and then so he's not very happy about that. And they start fighting, and then the woman from earlier shows up, and it turns out that that's Donna Troy. You probably assumed that. Donna Troy, and then this one is Aqualad, but he doesn't go by that anymore.
Right.
And so they start fighting because they're like, they're in the same situation as Dick, and they're kind of like vaguely remembering things, and they're kind of freaked out by it. So they start fighting, and then we cut back to the counselor, whose name is Lilith, and this is the first of this book's many like horror sequences, which I think is really cool because that same ghost is like taunting Lilith about like, you can't save them. I'm gonna bring them all together, and I'm gonna basically destroy the world, and it's gonna be great, and you can't stop me, kind of thing. So they keep fighting, and then Dick's like, I got to get out of here because this is not a good place to be in when an Amazon and an Atlantean are fighting. So he runs away, but then he goes to the clubhouse that Donna was at earlier. And it turns out that they all kind of remember it. And I think, okay, that's later. But yeah, they kind of all remember it from the past. And they're like, wait, what is this? Like someone graffitied the Teen Titans clubhouse over there. They kind of all vaguely remember it. And it's sort of triggering more memories. And then we cut to the jail cell that Roy Harper is in. And he's like, this cop guy's like, yeah, you're going to be in here for a long time because you like assaulted police officers and attempted murder and all that. But then Narc from the convenience store, he breaks Roy out of jail, and he's like, he's like, we need to go with the others. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think that it's never explicitly stated, but I think that maybe Narc didn't forget like the others, but I don't really know. But anyway, Narc breaks Speedy out of jail, and then we cut back to the others, and they start talking. And then I think this is the part where they kind of figure out that they knew each other from the past, like they know each other's names, even though they never told each other their names. And then like the invisible names like Robin, and that kind of like triggers like, and then so they kind of know that they have like different names, like superhero names like Robin, Wonder Girl, etc. And then at the end of this issue, Mel is listening to music, and something about that music kind of triggers something in his mind, and then it also sets off this shockwave that all the other ones hear as well. So Lilith hears it, Roy and Narc hear it, Donna, Troy, Dick, and Garth all hear it, as well as Karen, his wife. They all hear it. Right. And Hawk and Dove also hear it, who have not been introduced at this point in the story. Well, actually, just Hawk hears it. Dove doesn't, because if you'll remember, Dawn Granger, this version of Dove, was not a Teen Titan, but the previous
it was his brother Don.
Yes, exactly. So that's why she doesn't hear it.
Don Hall,
Don Hall, And so that sound kind of triggers a flashback where they're in the woods as like their younger actual Teen Titan selves, like Wonder Girl, Robin, Speedy, etc. And they're like tracking something, although they don't know what it is. And that cuts them to the present day, and they've all kind of just had that same vision from the sound. And they're like, this is weird. They're trying to figure out what it is, what's happening. So then we go to the hospital, because after Mel played that sound, he passed out and was put into an ambulance. And so his wife, Karen, goes to the hospital, but the ambulance never arrived at the hospital. So it turns out that ghost thing kind of hijacked the ambulance and like took him to the woods. And so he's out in the woods kind of just wandering around. And this is where we figure out the ghost's true identity as Mr. Twister, which is really cool because recently we talked about a comic that kind of reinvented a low rate villain, but I can't remember which one.
I think it was, I know I mentioned Sandman when we were talking about it, but what other comic were we? I can't remember. It was just like last week before. I don't know. It might have been Swamp Thing or something. I don't remember.
Anyway, so Mr. Twister was like the very first villain that the Teen Titans ever fought back in the very first issue.
Okay.
And he was just really goofy, like most comics in the 60s. It was this very goofy kind of silly thing. But it's really cool how they were able to kind of reimagine it as this like weird horror villain. So it's Mr. Twister is the main antagonist of the story. And so we meet back up with Hawk and Dove. They are tracking the same organ harvesting syndicate, I guess, the group, but they didn't know they were working with Dick Grayson because they didn't know Dick Grayson. Anyway, they're fighting, and then normally Hawk is super violent, but now because he's dealing with all these weird memories, he's like even more violent. So he's basically like completely lost it at this point. So Dove's like, we need to go seek help, and this is the point where I'm not exactly sure why, but it's still cool. Dick pulls out his Nightwing suit that he just had with him. And so this is the first time in like 2 or 3 years that he was Nightwing, and I think this is actually the last time he wears the red suit before Rebirth.
He goes back to blue.
So there's another flashback with Mel, although at this point he's Harold. That was his superhero name. Mel Duncan, he went by quite a few superhero names. The only ones I remember off the top of my head are Harold, and then he also was a version of the Guardian at some point as well.
In Young Justice, they just skip the Guardian and make him Guardian,
and so basically as the Herald, he can kind of like manipulate different sound waves and stuff, which is important for later. And then so in this flashback, he's kind of forcing them to, Mr. Twister is kind of forcing them to build this tower because he's trying to summon something. And then in the present, he has brought Mel to the same tower, and he's basically like, we're going to try to do this again because we learn this later, but essentially Mr. Twister gets his power from memory. And so in order to defeat him last time, they had to completely erase their entire memories of not only Mr. Twister but each other as well. So that's why none of them remember anything at all.
Gotcha.
Because they had to completely erase their memory from that. Yeah, and so Dick, Donna, and Garth, they go to a local diner, and they talk to the police officer there, and it turns out that he was actually a kid back when they first fought Mr. Twister, and that was actually, like I mentioned in the very first issue, and I believe that he was actually a character in the very first issue back in the 60s, although I don't remember the exact names, but yeah, and so yeah, and at this point, he accidentally calls him Robin Wonder Girl and Aqualad just by accident. Like, what did you say? Yeah, and then so it turns out that Dove took Hawk to Lilith, the same counselor as Roy, because he's having his episode, and then that was right when Roy Harper and Narc show up, and then they all start fighting each other because they are all kind of on edge with these weird memory things, and they kind of remember each other, so that kind of sets it off. But then Dove just kind of comes in and she's kind of upset by it, so she stops the fight, and then Lilith just kind of passes out. Anyway, so back to the hospital. This guy, he says his name is Mr. Richard, but that's not his real name. We'll figure out that later. He basically comes to Karen, and he's like, I can help you find your husband. I just need to talk to you in someplace private. And so they go off somewhere, and he's like, your husband was with the Teen Titans and the original Teen Titans. And she's like, wait, the superheroes? Because like they know about the current Teen Titans, which is the third generation with Tim Drake and all that.
Right.
But they don't know about the original Teen Titans because everyone forgot about that because in order to stop Mr. Twister. And he's like, no, there was a team before that. And he basically explains everything that's happening. And he's basically like, assuming the Titans don't remember everything, we can still stop this. But they're starting to piece it together. Like in the present day, they go to the same woods they were at in the flashback. And Mel's already on the tower. And Mr. Twister has this creepy like organ that's I call it the organ because it looks like it's made out of like actual organs. And so he makes him sing into it, and that sets off everybody again. And while this is happening, Donna Troy, Nightwing, and Garth are all fighting Mammoth in the woods. And this is the one thing, like there's a lot of really good detail with callbacks to the original series, which I'm surprised about because it's obviously not the most popular Titans comics, but Mammoth was the one detail that I don't think Mammoth was in the original series. He's more of a Marv Wolfman and George Perez villain. But anyway, it's fine. Like it doesn't really matter. So everybody hears it, and because they all hear it as well, Roy Harper, Narc, and Hawk, they all hear it. That kind of stops them fighting. And there's this kind of funny exchange where Narc is like, I'm Narc, and Dove's like, I'm Dove. And they're like, do we need to fight? And he's like, I'd prefer not to. And and then so they all go to Lilith, and she kind of explains what's happening. She was like a psychic superhero.
Yeah.
Her superhero identity is Omen, and she was kind of like what Raven is to her Teen Titans. She was kind of like the Raven of the original Teen Titans.
Gotcha.
And then so we cut back to the hospital where they're talking, and it turns out that Mr. Richards is with an organization called Diablo, and they just kind of exist to protect the world from threats like Mr. Twister. And so they're like, and so he basically explains, he catches Karen up to speed, like assuming they don't remember and everything will be fine. But if they do remember, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So then Donna and Garth, they beat Mammoth. And there's this moment where Donna's like, that was like kind of easy. And she kind of theorizes that possibly Mammoth wasn't there to kill them, just to weaken them for later. And then we cut back to Lilith, who's catching up all the other Titans up to speed. And then right after the fight with Mammoth, Donna's like, well, I don't know, we should probably go to the tower because I feel like that's calling us, although they don't know that they're not supposed to go there because they just feel like they're called to this place. And then so Mr. Richards gets off the phone and he's like, it's worse than we thought. They're all hearing the sound. They probably all remember. And so at this point, according to him and his organization, Diablo, the only way to save the world is to kill all the Titans. So they just like stop Mr. Twister's plan altogether because he can't use them if they're dead. Yeah, so they reach the tower and they're kind of climbing up the tower. That's kind of this altar to whatever Mr. Twister is trying to summon.
Right.
Yeah, and then so Mr. Richards sends other Diablo agents to stop the Titans because apparently they were being monitored this whole time. And so there's the agents that are sent there are like these weird robotic, like they're kind of organic, but they also can turn into robots, as you see here.
Yeah.
And so that they're fighting. And one of them turns into a car, and it's pretty crazy.
Also, they're Transformers.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah, and then so Mr. Richards like, well, I have to kill you now because you're associated with the Titans and you could be used. Because you also heard the sound, even though she wasn't an original member. She also heard the sound, so she could be potentially used. And at this point, we find out that she has superpowers too. And if you haven't guessed, she's actually Bumblebee, the superhero Bumblebee.
Right, yeah, I kind of knew that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, she didn't know that she had superpowers, but she does. That
Interesting.
comes in later. Yeah, and this is the guy I was telling you about. He turns into a car. And they
oh, gotcha. All right.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, and then so Lilith kind of knocks out the other one with her mental powers, and she's like, it's worse than we thought. There's others that are starting to trigger things that are leading to Mr. Twister's plan. And then Roy's like, well, if there are others, we should probably meet up with them. So that's a really bad idea, but the other ones are like, well, we should probably help them anyway at this point because they've already triggered it. So they all go to the woods anyway. And Nightwing, Donna Troy, and Garth, they reach the top of the tower where Mel is, and they're like, oh, there's a guy over there is hurt. We should go save him. And Mel's like, nah, you shouldn't have come here. This is a bad idea. I sung the song and you came. And this is the beginning of the last issue, I believe. Yeah, issue 8, chapter 8. Yeah, and so the others arrive at the base of the tower while the others are at the top of the tower, and they're like, well, Lilith was like, this is still a bad idea. And Roy's like, well, if there are other Titans, we still need to help them. And so they race to the top of the tower while the others are up there with Mel. And they're like, you don't have to do anything. Mel, you don't have to do anything. He can't make you do anything because he doesn't have an actual form. He's just kind of this ghost thing. And that's like, Mel's like, that's not true. He's in my mind. He's forcing me to do this. I'm basically his puppet. And then there's this exchange where Mel's like, he tells Mr. Twister to go to hell. And Mr. Twister's like, no, I'm trying to bring hell to Earth. And so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so Karen shows up and she uses her powers to hurt Mr. Twister. And everyone's like, why is there a pregnant woman here? And then Nightwing's like, well, you're missing the point. Like, she actually hurt him. So at this point, he has enough power to have a form. So they start fighting him. But that doesn't really last long because at this point he has enough power to not only have a form but have quite a bit of other powers as well. So he kind of gets him in like this lightning trance thing over here. And that was when the others show up. Roy kind of shoots him, and that kind of knocks him out for a little bit, but not really. And then he kind of gets them all into a trance. And he's basically like, well, you're all here now, and I'm going to summon my master, and he's going to basically eat this whole world, and it's going to be great.
Nice.
Yeah. And so he makes Mel sing one more time. And the Mr. Twister's like, basically, well, you're all here. You're all the Teen Titans, and you all remember me now, so I'm at my full power. And at this point, they're like, well, we're not exactly the same Teen Titans that we were last time. Like, this is kind of cheesy, but basically, Dick's like, well, I'm not Robin anymore. I'm Nightwing. And Roy's like, I'm not Speedy anymore. I'm Arsenal, and et cetera, et cetera. And it goes through the whole line. And
we're older now.
Exactly. And Dawn's like, I wasn't even here to begin with, so that they didn't have any power over Dove because like that Dove wasn't even there.
Right.
But the one hero that didn't change was Hawk because he's still Hawk.
Oh yeah, he's still Hawk. Yeah.
And then so he's kind of in a trance, and then he kind of gets all of his memory back, and he realizes that this is a retcon, but he realizes that Mr. Twister was the one who killed the original Dove, and that kind of breaks his trance, and so he basically just goes completely wild on Mr. Twister, basically not killing him, but beating him up pretty badly, and then they just throw him back into the portal that he opened, and that kind of closes it, and then they're all happy. And then they talk about going to the hospital, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not hurt that bad." And Karen's like, "No, I'm giving birth right now." And Timing's like, "Oh shit, we need people who can fly to get her to the hospital like right now." So that's kind of fun. And then they end up, they're at the hospital, everything's fine, and they're at the diner, and they're like, "So we're all here, but there's like something missing, like they can't really place it." And then there's like a flash of lightning, and if you
it's Wally,
like the actual flash, that's right. Wally, and so it kind of feeds into that the rebirth a little bit with Wally, and
right.
In the story, reading it now, it's not really that apparent, but at the time they were kind of hinting that Mr. Twister's master was, I don't know if they went out and said it, but they said basically that Mr. Twister's master had something to do with Rebirth and Doomsday Clock. So a lot of people assumed it was Dr. Manhattan, although it was never directly confirmed. So there was just a lot of speculation there. But that's basically the story. It's just really cool how they took all the characters and stories and all that from the 60s, and they were able to retcon it into the modern day.
Yeah, that is cool.
And it's good, and it's this story basically serves the purpose of setting up the ongoing Titan series, which I enjoyed. It has some issues, but it has its issues. Haha.
Right.
It has some issues with it, but I enjoyed it overall. But this story in particular is a lot better than the series it's actually setting up, which I think is cool. It utilizes not all of them, but most of the original characters really well. Like Narc, who's Cave Boy. I don't even think he showed up since the 60s, but they were able to tie him really well. And Hawk and Dove, they were in the New 52, but they didn't. I think their run only lasted for like 10 issues. So
yeah. And what about, was this the first time we saw Donna Troy and Aqualad in the New 52?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting how they kind of updated their looks to kind of match the aesthetic of Wonder Woman and Aquaman in the New 52.
Yeah.
So I can end this presentation now. And so it's a really cool story that I really like.
Yeah, I do like the thing about DC is when they do have like reboots and retcons and stuff, they usually have some sort of in-universe version for any continuity errors or like anything like that, so they kind of, like, well, this was erased, but then they go back and like revisit it, and they forgot and all that stuff. So
right.
And kind of the whole like Doomsday Clock Rebirth thing was like a big thing about that. So I thought that was kind of cool. But this is a cool story. I wasn't familiar with it at all.
It is really cool
until you mentioned it. Like I've never heard of it before. Titans Hunt.
Another thing
new too,
that people call it basically Teen Titans if it was written by Stephen King, and they say that because its story is very similar to it, where like the memory and all of that flashbacks and stuff.
The horror elements are very cool.
It was really cool how they were able to reinvent Mr. Twister like that.
Very nice. Well, we don't have time. This ran a little bit longer because we both had to tackle a whole graphic novel. So, but yes, we don't really have time for the our cultured pick segment. But oh well. So that is the episode. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us with while we were talking about some of our favorite comics, favorite storylines. This has been the Cultured Pull List. If you would like to help support us so we can bring you more content, check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd. And if you would like to support our show specifically, look for our show's specific tier. Thank you to all of our current Patreon supporters. I have been your host, Michael Malillo, and my co-host is Luke S. Our logo and our visual assets were designed by Jose Navarro, and our intro was designed by myself. Thank you again for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you would like to check out The Cultured Nerd on social media, scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you would like to check out me and Luke's brand, Casual Experts, we have our own YouTube channel and podcast and social media, all that stuff. Go ahead and scan the QR code on the bottom right.